Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 141, and this week I am spotlighting Crazy Nights, the third full-length album from the new wave of British heavy metal, well, I guess you can say legends, Tygers of Pan Tang. Originally released back in November, though it's not really quite specified on what day it was released in November, but it was at least November of 1981. And since we are past November, this album has reached its 40th anniversary. So I think it's just I would say it's a fine time now to at least spotlight this album again, so I can show my, I guess you can say, my honest appreciation for this album, since I will get into certain things as far as the reactions that people usually have for this album, and I will get into why I don't share a lot of some of those opinions anyways. So let me just get into at least some information about Crazy Nights here. It is the third album, like I stated, from Tygers of Pan Tang. It does come after Spellbound, which was released earlier within the year of 1981, which I already spotlighted that album about 7 months ago, which would have been April 19th, when I made, or at least I had, Spellbound as the Album of the Week episode. So both the Spellbound and Crazy Nights were both released on the same year. It's just that Crazy Nights technically ended up becoming the result of, from at least from what I've heard, from being taken off tour within September, or maybe late into August, or at least maybe early into September of 1981, to go into a studio, and that studio would have been Trident Studios in London, and then apparently also Rock City Studios in Shepperton, UK. So I guess they were booked in the two studios to record, I guess maybe to really maybe just finish up maybe the album, but that's where they recorded it and finished up this album. And the difference also going into here, since for the previous two albums, that being Wildcat and Spellbound, Chris Sangarides was the producer. But when it came to obviously being taken off the road to write and record, or at least just to record Crazy Nights, Chris Sangarides was busy producing Renegade from Thin Lizzy. So he couldn't take time off to work on producing the album for Tygers of Pan Tang. So instead, they opted to at least get a hold of Dennis McKay, who was best known for producing albums for like Pat Travers, Tommy Bolin for his only two full-length albums, and then of course being best known for producing Stained Class by Judas Priest. So there was at least some fine credentials behind Dennis McKay there. So I guess you can say the result is why I think it resulted in a little more of a more cleaner, less raw sounding album than compared to like Wildcat and Spellbound. But I'll get into at least musically there. So there we go. And then, so finishing up the album, it then gets released through MCA Records on November of, or at least in November of 1981. So there you go. There's at least your little sort of history leading up to, in terms of recording and one of the reasons why this album got made in the first place. So you hopefully that that's enough for you to at least to understand there. So there's your little history. Just tiny bit of history leading up into Crazy Nights. So let's get into the actual album. And since they had recorded at least about, technically you could say they recorded about 12 songs total for the album, but only at least 9 made it onto the album. 2 songs were made as a special 7-inch, bonus 7-inch actually, for some of the really earliest release versions of Crazy Nights, and then of course the other one other song was made as a B-side to at least one of the songs off the album. So, and also one of the songs that was made as like the part of the bonus 7-inch was even made as a B-side to one of the songs on the album. So let me get into all of that. Let's get into like the track list and everything. And since again, it's traditionally 9 songs, and it would then be clocked in at least at 37 minutes and 51 seconds. For a particular Japanese copy of the album, if I can try and find the track listing for this one, here we go. It should list all of this. That's kind of strange because of they're listing 10 songs with the Japanese, but on the back cover for or at least the back cover that Caroline used for the MCA years box set, they actually used the back cover of one of the Japanese record versions of Crazy Nights, and it lists 11 songs actually instead of 10. So it would include both pretty much the 2 songs that were a part of that bonus 7-inch that came along with Crazy Nights and made them a part of at least the album. Is just that one of the songs, they would both end off the B both like the A side and the B side. They'll be the endings to both those 2 sides. So I think that's kind of interesting that Metal Archives here are only listing 10 instead. But either way, it would have been allowing at least over 40 minutes, or at least over 42 minutes for at least that. And of course, here for this copy they're listing at, it was 42 minutes and 5 seconds. It's confusing. I'm getting confused. So I'm just gonna run through these fucking songs anyways, because of I just got completely confused, and it already kind of made this shit jittery. So fucking fantastic. Either way, these 9 original songs for the album, of course, begins with Do It Good, Love Don't Stay, Never Satisfied, which is not a Judas Priest cover. Of course, I almost tried to make a Kiss joke towards it, but that would have been too fucking cliched. Either way, let's move on. We got Running Out of Time, the title track, Down and Out, Lonely Man, Make a Stand, and finally ending with Raised on Rock. So there's at least your 9 original songs. Now the 2 songs that were released as the bonus 7-inch for at least some of the really early released versions of Crazy Nights begins as this. Let me find this real quick. With the right here. It would, on the A side, it would be the Stormlands, and then on the B side, it would be Slip Away. So there's at least the 2 songs for the bonus 7-inch that came with some of the early pressings of Crazy Nights. So there we go. Now let's get into at least to the song Paradise Drive, which was actually released as a B-side to the song Love Don't Stay. Whereas the song Slip Away was after the these pressings of Crazy Nights was then used as a B-side to Do It Good. So there's at least all your songs and everything for the album there. So there we go. And the lineup here we still got is John Deverell, who of course debuted on the previous album. We still got Rob Weir on guitar. John Sykes is still the guitar player, and we'll get into his future with Tygers of Pan Tang after I'm done giving you my overall thoughts and everything on the album. We still got Richard Rocky Laws on bass, and then Brian Dick on drums. So there's your lineup for the album still. The cover artwork for the album is actually done by Rodney Matthews, who's done plenty of fucking artwork. Danny's best known for doing artwork for like Diamond Head. He did, again, the Borrowed Time album. He did, of course, the first Praying Mantis album, maybe even some of the other ones. I'm not quite sure, but he's definitely best known for doing Time Tells No Lies, I think it's called. And Nazareth, he's done, again, No Mean City. He's done plenty of fucking good artwork. Even the band, what's it, Bitch of Sin, their very first album, which is Invasion, I think it's called. Can't remember. Or Invaders. He did that out, or was it? No, it's Predator, maybe. I think that's what it's called. I can't fucking remember. Either way, it's the first Bitch and Sins album, and he's done that. He did the artwork for that one. He's done a lot of artwork for plenty of great sort of bands. What's another one I'm thinking of? He's done for, I think Magnum might have been one of the other one. The British, or was it German prog band? Can't remember. Either way, he's done, you get the point. He's done a lot of fucking artwork for a lot of bands. He's the one that also did that other artwork version for Scorpion's first album, Lonesome Crow. That was, I think, the British, the early 80s British released version of Lonesome Crow. That was a Rodney Matthews artwork. So there we go. But yeah, he did the artwork for this one. I think he did the artwork for the previous album too, Spellbound. But he's done that. It's a great artwork though too, though it really kind of mimics the that famous scene from the original King Kong. But instead of being King Kong, it's a fucking big tiger clawing down two airplanes with tiger fucking stripes and shit. So there we go. There it is. At least I went through all of that. Let's finally get into the actual music, okay? Let's get into it. For some reason, before I really delved into at least what was the response and the overall reception towards Crazy Nights, to tell you the truth, this was one of the earliest albums I got into by Tygers of Pan Tang when I first was finding out about Tygers of Pan Tang. Back in 2008, this is one of the albums I ended up checking out first, too, besides maybe Wildcat and Spellbound. And it was the songs such as Make a Stand, Do It Good, Never Satisfied, and those kind of songs I was checking out early on. And I just fell in love with their style and everything. And it was one of those, besides Diamond Head, that really took me on that path down that new wave or British heavy metal movement rabbit hole. So it just made me inspired checking a lot of those kind of bands. But this was one of my earliest discoveries on YouTube when I was living in the trailer in the RV park here in Susanville back in 2008, around maybe November, December time. Maybe could have been October time. But it was pretty early on, and I just loved everything that I had heard by them, and it just became difficult to really find their stuff inside record stores, especially Raspy Music down in Fresno, California, especially when I would be doing my visits down in Fresno during those years. But it wasn't very easy. But when I really got heavily into this album, and when I started really exploring, the reviews and everything, I was a little bit kind of surprised by how the negative response this album got, because I mean, tell you the truth, I still don't quite understand I still don't get it. The response, the negative response toward this one is like everyone loves Spellbound, but I just see a lot of people consider this sound to be a complete departure, which I can never understand how much a departure this really was from Spellbound. I mean, Spellbound was already becoming a departure anyways from Wildcat, which sounded like a completely different band. That's the thing, both Spellbound and Crazy Nights sound so far removed from the first album, but to me, I love all three fucking records. But for these people that seem to kind of claim how Crazy Nights was a departure from Spellbound, I never really understood why many people thought that or think that way. Because yes, Dennis McKay, he brings in a more of a slightly more cleaner more crisper production and mixing compared to Chris Sangaride's more raw approach to like albums like Wildcats and Spellbound. But still, musically and writing wise, I think the overall, the attitude of Spellbound, I think, is still here on Crazy Nights. I mean, in songs like, for example, like Love Don't Stay, Never Satisfied, which again takes its title directly from a Judas Priest song, at times sounds more like a Judas Priest type hard rocker. If anything, it sounds like something that could have almost been on like Stained Glass or even Killing Machine. It's got that heaviness to it, and it's got that raw edge to it, and it still sounds like the new wave of British heavy metal movement style heaviness. Still there. Running Out of Time is still pretty much almost a proto speed metal song. It still has that kind of the new wave of British heavy metal sound is still here. Even Make a Stand kind of pulls more so typical. Almost kind of to me reminded me like another sort of like a version of like Take It off of Spellbound. Raise on Rock is not that completely different from any of the early Tygers of Pan Tang songs, so it's still got plenty of that. The only thing that might come off as being kind of commercial-like would be the song Do It Good. The title track, Down and Out, and Lonely Man, I think are probably the closest to the really more melodic, more commercial edge, but I don't think it's nearly as, I guess you can say nearly as prevalent or as strong as, let's say, the really commercial and very poppy leanings that you will end up hearing on the album that would come after Crazy Nights. So it plays along, but at the same time, it's not nearly as completely direct. It's just, I would say it's a very nice blend or mixture between being commercial, melodic, but still very being hard and heavy, and still providing those straight up, knife to the bone, heavy hitters. It still runs around that. It's a great, I think, fine mixture that I prefer. If you're gonna go the commercial route, this to me is, I think, one of the better examples of that, where it still has that commercial, almost accessible edge, but it still comes off as still being very hard rock, and it still has a fine edge to it that keeps it from being going too down that path of being really commercialized pop rock that Tygers of Pan Tang would go down to later on, basically to compete with Def Leppard in like albums like Pyromania and so on. I would say this is almost in the same league as, like, let's say High and Dry, or even, let's say, British Steel from Judas Priest, or even Screaming for Vengeance. It's in that almost, it kind of borders on that in a way, or even, let's say, for an example, Power and the Glory from Saxon. It's one of those albums where I think it borders into that sort of a category of, again, mixing in more melodically and more commercial leanings, but still retaining its heavy edge. And I think it's one of those best examples. Again, listen to a song like Never Satisfied and Running Out of Time. These two songs really are probably the biggest, the two songs that I would say are the best example of that sound like classic Tygers of Pan Tang songs. It's got that new wave or British heavy metal edge to them, and it fits along the lines of those kind of artists. So it's really the two songs that sound like classic new wave or British heavy metal era Tygers of Pan Tang. But even some of the more melodic songs, I think, are quite fine on this one. I think some of the best of these examples, I think, go to a song like maybe like Make a Stand, Lonely Man, and Down and Out. Do It Good has some cool solos there from John Sykes. That's one of the other sort of standout points of this album for me, is also the fact that John Sykes is still able to strut his stuff. He's still able to sharpen his axe, plenty of times on this one. I think that that's what keeps the sound from becoming a total travesty. And I don't really consider the sound to be a travesty, but it keeps it from going into the sort of into the realms of where they would end up heading into with the next album. So John Sykes keeps him from going into that, going really, really down into that. And that's why I think the album has a lot more stronger parts, more stronger points than some of the albums that they would release after this one. So it's still, that's why it's still able to retain its edge of Spellbound. It's just that Dennis McKay's production and mixing is just a lot more different and more cleaner sounding than compared to Chris Sangride's. But the attitude, I still think is still there and is still present on some of these songs. So that's how I feel there. As far as the songs that were released as part of that bonus 7-inch, Sip Away is probably my personal favorite. It still is a fast, heavy, melodic rocker, but again, it's still very much in the sort of new wave of British heavy metal department there. It's still within that same range. It still has a heaviness, and I still like it. Stormlands is more of a kind of a very commercially bluesy rocker, kind of borders on being kind of a semi-ballad, but it's an alright song. I don't think it's terrible, but it's not really amazing to begin with, but it's fine. Got a nice mood to it. That's about it. Paradise Drive is kind of the same sort of feel of like Raised on Rock, but not nearly as hard-hitting. Again, it's more of a boogie rocker, but again, that's kind of typical, though, of the new wave or British heavy metal movement anyways. A lot of these kind of bands, like Dead Ringer, for example, was going for this sort of almost sort of boogie-tinged, almost rock style that even Saxon was flirting with at this time with like Denim and Leather. So it's not far off from at least those kind of bands like Spider. So that's what a song like Paradise Drive always kind of reminds me of. So it's that. Just that John Devril's voice is so more so smooth and croon-like. But he's got a fine voice anyways. And he works, it just fits well with this kind of style anyways. It's just that it does give them more of its commercial edge. But again, John Sykes does bring a lot of that hard edge to it and keeps these more melodic sounding songs still have that nice edge to them. So that's why it balances it all out. So there we go. That's just my overall personal opinions on it. I think it's still a fine album. So there are plenty of great songs on this one. So personally, I consider it one of my other favorite albums from Tygers of Pan Tang. So I don't really share a lot of the same opinions that a lot of other people tend to really have toward this one. I don't share them. If anything, I almost hate them. But that's just personally me. You might end up disliking my overall appreciation of this album. And that's fine. You have every right to not like the what I think about this album. You have all the right to not agree with my sayings for Crazy Nights. But I have the right to disagree with you. So hopefully you understand that. So there we go. So after Crazy Nights is released, I think they would still do some touring for this album, but eventually John Sykes would leave the band and would end up joining what would become the final lineup for Thin Lizzy in the 1980s, and he would then record what would become the final studio album for Thin Lizzy, that being Thunder and Lightning. And that album would then be produced by Chris Sangaride. So, working with him again, since Chris Sangaride was producing, Renegade from this point in 1981. So, he would be at least with Thin Lizzy up until they decided to disband, and then John Sykes would then be off to, I don't know how the story went. He could have either left during that when Thin Lizzy was during its last shows, or I think he just waited to join Whitesnake after Thin Lizzy had at least fulfilled its final booked shows. So eventually, again, after all of that, John Sykes then would be off to playing with David Coverdale and Whitesnake, and he would be with Whitesnake up until after the 1987 album, and then I guess he would just get fired. Who knows how that went, and then he would form Blue Murder. So there's at least will become the story arc for John Sykes after Tygers of Pan Tang. For the other band, for the rest of the guys in John Sykes, well, John Deverell and co. would still be apart, but they would get somebody to replace John Sykes, and that would be a guy by the name of Fred Purser. And that lineup would result in recording what would, personally, I believe, to really be the first true mediocre album from Tygers of Pan Tang. That is The Cage. Boy, it's a good thing I'm not really planning on making The Cage as I am the week episode, because of I will just get over right now. Whatever edge, or at least whatever identity I think Tygers of Pan Tang had before The Cage was gone by this time. At least when they had John Sykes, there was at least still he still at least understood and knew what the new wave or British heavy metal movement and what those bands were doing and what the fans wanted. At least he still knew what to bring to the table in terms of being at least a very heavy, hard rockin' band in at least the new wave or British heavy metal movement. And that's why I've always didn't really quite share the same opinions most did towards Crazy Nights, is because I think, again, with John Sykes, with him is why I think that album resulted still in having a lot of its attitude still intact. When they lost him, that's why, and gaining Fred Purser, that's why I feel like The Cage was really went down further into what I think John Deverell really wanted to probably take the band into, and really try and compete with the likes of Def Leppard and so on, and try and really break into at least America. And that's why I think why The Cage is such a huge departure from anything. I mean, they were kind of facelifting a bit of their sound and identity from Wildcats, but still, at least when they had John Sykes, they still were able to have at least a little bit of that heavy edge to them. They still had that attitude left. The Cage, they lost all of that, and that's why the result, maybe with at least maybe one or two passable songs, why it just sounds like a complete train wreck. And it's one of the absolute mediocre albums, probably the most, even more squeakiest, most cleanest, most overproduced album from Tygers of Pan Tang up to this point, let alone the albums that would come afterwards, that were just Tygers of Pan Tang and all but name, and were just morally mere just fucking John Deverell fucking solo albums. The Cage is just a complete train wreck, and I think it's one of the most mediocre albums. And it'd be, again, there's really nothing that's left on The Cage that remotely comes close to at least to what you got from at least Spellbound and at least Crazy Nights. All that kind of pretty much disappeared, and it's just a complete shell of what they once were before. So that's why I will completely go on and agree with those that really dislike The Cage. That's why I will at least agree with them and jump on that and be on that bandwagon, because The Cage absolutely kind of sucks. So, but Crazy Nights I don't think is nearly as much the train wreck that many people seem to make it out to be. But The Cage, oh, definitely, it's a fucking train wreck. It definitely, I mean, I don't hate it. It's just, it's not really the Tygers of Pan Tang. It's just it sounds like almost a completely different band. It's just so poppier and more commercial sounding than any of the previous ones. It's like, it's not at times, it almost doesn't even sound like a hard rock album. Crazy Nights still has a very hard rockin' edge to it, and still at least sounds pretty passable. The Cage is not at times fucking passable as being a straight up hard rock album. It's more very commercial sounding pop rock. So it's not a very great album. So there we go. Again, with losing John Sykes, they lost that really hard rock edge to them. And Fred Purser is just a completely different guitar player. He writes differently, and they lost a bit of that. So they lost that identity, is what I'm trying to say. So there we go. So Crazy Nights. That's pretty much where I'm at with this Album of the Week episode. So there we go. Again, 40th anniversary to at least what I consider to be probably at this point the last good album from Tygers of Pan Tang before way decades later, and basically revived and kind of, I would say, revived the name, and pretty much understood where I think everything went wrong and rectified that. So there we go. But again, it is the 40th anniversary. If you have any thoughts, whether or not they are at least positive or negative, you can leave them in the comments section below. But if you've never really listened to Crazy Nights and you're looking for at least what would be a good starting point to listen to Tygers of Pan Tang, depending on who you ask for, they're either going to point you towards Spellbound, or they're just going to say avoid anything after fucking Wildcats and just stick with Wildcats. But personally for me, since I like both the albums, or at least all three of these albums, I would say you can go with Wildcats, and then afterwards you can go into Spellbound and then Crazy Nights, and you can make up your mind if you want to go any further. So there we go. At least with modern era stuff, maybe Ambush would be fine to check out, and maybe even some of the other two after that would be fine enough. So there we go. That's it. Hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I'm out. I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.